Hey everyone, Mychal Bryan here, and today I want to share with you the first class in our new installment of Oraculos Astrology Masterclasses. This semester, we're focusing on traditional approaches to psychological astrology because more and more astrologers need to know that traditional astrology has all the tools necessary to assist both students and clients alike in their search for both soul and psyche within the natal chart. In these live demonstrations, I know nothing about the people who are submitting these charts, and I am reading these charts on the spot without any preparation to a live audience. This ability to speak deeply to the tangible and concrete life experiences of a person, as well as to who they have grown to become as a result of those experiences, purely through reading their chart with no background information about them at all, represents the true magic of astrology, in my opinion. But this magic isn't something specific to me or my ability. This skill of accurate, clear, and concrete chart delineation is something that can be taught, learned, and mastered. So if you're an astrologer and you're hungry to dig deeper into your practice and cultivate excellence and greater skillfulness in how you use astrology, then join our Oraculos Astrology Masterclass today. Visit www.oraculosastrology.com to register for our once-weekly upcoming classes. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and as always, please do like, subscribe to, and share the Oraculos podcast with your other astrology-loving and magically-minded friends. I'm sending you all my love from myself and the entire Oraculos School of Astrology family. We'll see you in class.
But November 5, 1961.
1961.
Los Angeles, California.
Time.
Oh, sorry. 6:33 a.m.
Lovely time. 6:33 a.m.
Los Angeles, California.
Is it this one? No, it's how you spell it? Los Angeles. Great. And here?
Oh, it's a female chart.
Okay. Lovely. This is pleasant within my heart and mind. And the reason why this is pleasant within my heart and mind is because it's lovely when we end up in the middle of a sign, because we don't have to have those sorts of considerations. Now, apropos ending up in the middle of a sign, let's just talk about that for 2 seconds. This is the reason why. Has anyone here practiced horary astrology with any love at all? I mean, even just a little tiny bit horary. Okay, Ruth, a hand. Okay, anyway, and the Oraculos people were not there yet. So Jason as well and Ruth, a hand. So with horary astrology, one of the quote unquote considerations before a judgment is that if the chart is too early, you don't take it. And if the chart is too late, you don't take it. And these are very ancient horary rules that have absolutely no application in the 21st century. And the reason why they have absolutely no application in the 21st century is because these rules were made pre-clocks. And so in a pre-clock society, of course, if the chart is having early degrees of a sign rising, as in 0 degrees of a sign rising or 29 degrees of a sign rising, you don't take it, because back then in the 13th century, they weren't sure whether or not that was an accurate time. Because on a cloudy day, can you imagine taking out your pocket sundial or running to your local obelisk to see to make sure that the shadow was exactly in the right place? Heaven forbid that it's a rainy day, or that someone asks you a horary question at night. You'd have to go to your water clock and make sure that it's all of these considerations. However, today in the 21st century, if we have a horary chart that has early degrees rising or late degrees rising, that's okay with us, because we have clocks that work. So for horary, this early and late degree consideration is less a factor than for natal. And don't be on a ship either, exactly. Don't be on a ship in the 13th century getting asked a horary question, which is why they usually ask the horary questions before they went on the ship. Will the ship crash? when I would say still on the dry land. Anyway, so that's the chief consideration regarding the clock situation. So horary today is a safe practice whether or not the degree is too early or too late, i.e. 29 degrees or 0. Natal, not so much, because we know that people just don't take the correct birth time in general, unless they know someone who's an astrologer and they've been, frightened into doing it. People usually don't take the correct birth time. So I'm very, very happy when I see someone with at least 5 degrees of anything rising, 5 or more degrees rising. Between 5 and 25 degrees is my safe space, because it approximately takes 4 minutes for 1 degree to rise across the eastern horizon. So 5, 10, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, that means that if someone is off an entire sign, they would have had to have gotten their birth time wrong by at least 25 minutes, which is highly unlikely if someone has a relatively reasonable birth time. I don't feel like I'm making the most sense. Does this kind of make sense to you all, what I'm kind of saying, Ish? Okay, that's just my personal qualm with the birth time thing, but I know other people who believe that if Jesus sent me this person, then Jesus wanted me to read this person's chart, and that's between you, that person, and Jesus. So we're diving into this chart this evening. Now, the first thing I do in terms of setting up my charts is I pull up the declination table on the side, just because the declination table is the best thing since sliced bread. If you haven't looked at your own declinations and your own charts, you need to, because it will change your life. Great. So let us begin working with this chart. Insofar as traditional approaches to psychological astrology is concerned, our entire lifeblood is the ascendant. Period. Every single thing you can possibly want to know in terms of the soul and the psyche of a person from a traditional perspective is held within the ascendant, planets within the ascendant, the ruler of the ascendant, aspect relationships to the ascendant, hidden aspect relationships to the ascendant by virtue of declination. All of those things collectively give us a wonderful composite image as to who the person is who we're actually dealing with. And nothing quite does that trick, much like the ascendant. Someone's unmuted. Is there a question? Okay. So, moving on. So the ascendant. Now, if you're of a more modern astrology perspective, it's probably going to be the sun, the moon, and the ascendant. Unfortunately for us in this chart, I won't have to get anyone to believe anything, because here we already see the sun is with that ascendant. So here we have the sun and ascendant operating as one factor. However, from a traditional astrology perspective, that sun isn't necessarily, i.e., the willpower or the soul or the self. The sun is as important as the house that it rules. And the house that the sun rules within this chart is the 10th house. Do you see? I see knitted eyebrows. Are you all seeing that the sun is the ruler of this 10th house? So what that is meaning is that the things that the 10th house represent are going to become vitally important for the native. Similarly, any planets within the first house are going to bring their meanings from whichever other houses they rule. In this case, the only other house that this Mars is ruling is this 6th house, which means that whatever that 6th house represents is going to be made manifest strongly within the life of this person as well. I'm getting ahead of myself, so before I get too far ahead of myself, let us go now and set up our working document for this. I don't know that many things. I only know a little bit of things, and the little bit of things I know, I do very, very well. And so I will share those things with you tonight. And this, what I'm doing with you this evening, is exactly the same thing that I would do if someone were coming to me for a reading. So this is TAT-PA working document. Desktop. Oh, Jesus. I really shouldn't put anything else on my desktop. Oh, Lord. It's not going to be a pretty... Let's see. Can I go somewhere else? 2021 OSA resources. All right. So this is TAT-PA number 2. So the first thing we want to do is note the degree of the ascendant. 15 degrees Scorpio, SCO, 15 degrees Scorpio, 30 minutes, which is nice for us for a number of reasons. One of which is because 15 degrees of the fixed signs corresponds with 0 degrees of the cardinal signs. And all of the cardinal signs, 0 degrees Aries, 0 degrees Cancer, 0 degrees Libra, 0 degrees Capricorn, are very potent degrees to be on. And 15 of any of the fixed signs is automatically going to either be in a semi-square or a sesquiquadrate to one of those degrees. Now, I know that those words probably just went straight over our heads, which is fine, but be it resolved, if you have anything within your chart at 15 degrees of the fixed signs, that is essentially the same as that thing being angular. Don't shoot the messenger. That's what it means. So this person has their ascendant at 15 degrees Scorpio. The next thing that we do that is ascendant based is we take a look at the D3 and the D12. The D3 is the third divisional chart. The D12 is the 12th divisional chart. D3, we call it Deccan in the West. D12, we call it Dodakata Moria or Dwadashamsha in the East. These are both Western techniques, even though the term D3, D12 are specifically Eastern terms that are used in Vedic astrology. D3 refers to, if I were to take this ascendant and chop it into 3 segments and give each of those segments to the signs of that same triplicity, I would get Scorpio ruling the first 10 degrees of Scorpio. Then I would get Pisces ruling the second 10 degrees of Scorpio. And then ultimately I would get Cancer ruling the final 10 degrees of Scorpio. This person has their ascendant in the Pisces Decan. So I put there PIS for Pisces. Sorry, Pisces. Now, next, we have the D12, the Dodakata Moria, which isn't as easy to see because what that means is that I take my ascendant and I chop the 30 degrees of the, I see Catherine trying to work it out in her brain. I chop the 30 degrees of my ascendant up into even divisions of 2.5 degrees each, and I end up with the sign being cut into 12 equal parts. At 15 degrees Scorpio, this is corresponding with the opposition sign of Scorpio, which would be Taurus. So this person's D12 is in Taurus, which is good information for us to know. Let me see, 1256 before that would be Libra. Okay, cool. So that is the end of that for that, and I just move on. This is something that I'm sure we'll come back to time and time again. So no worries if at this moment it isn't really the most salient of things. Now, the next thing that we want to do is take a look at planets in the ascendant. And the planets in this ascendant are The Sun, SU, Neptune, and Mars. Now, perhaps you are thinking that the Sun and Neptune are most assuredly not in this ascendant. Let's just take a, check of the pulse of the land. Is there anyone amongst us who, and honestly, like, I just finished having pad thai. This is me at my nicest. I genuinely am curious to know, is there anyone amongst us who is curious as to why I say that the Sun and Neptune are in the ascendant, when they're clearly not in the ascendant physically?
You're using the 5-degree rule.
I would attend because they're so close. Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Okay, so hold on. Let me hear you, Shannon, then Wes, then Ruth. Shannon?
Yeah, I guess that wouldn't make sense to me, so I would be curious, yeah.
Awesome. And then Wes?
I assumed that you thought so because they were so close. It's a little more of an orb than I usually use, but push them forward when they're that close to the next house.
And then Ruth?
Are you using the 5-degree rule?
I'm most assuredly using the 5-degree rule. I'm most assuredly using the 5-degree rule. The 5-degree rule, which is older than the hills, states that if a planet is within 5 degrees of the following house cusp and in the same sign as that following house cusp, then that planet, though its body be in the house where it is, that planet has already given its power over to that following house. I'll say that in like layman's terms because that's the 13th century definition. The layman's terms definition of this is, if you have a planet that is within 5 degrees of the next house and it's in the same sign as the next house, then that planet is considered to have given its power over to that next house. I recently taught this to my students at Oraculos, and I said, imagine that you have your house, you have a patch of grass before your house, and then you have the front gate. If someone was to fart at your front gate, you probably wouldn't be able to smell that over there, thank God, because it's so far away from anywhere where you possibly live. However, if that person was to pass wind on the grass between your house and that front gate, there's a greater likelihood that that person's orb of stench is going to reach you, if only a little bit of a whiff. But if that person comes directly up to your front porch and you're sitting on your front porch having a lemonade and they let one rip, you will most assuredly smell that. And similarly, when referring to houses and when referring to planets in relation to houses, if a planet is as close to the front door of another house as possible, i.e. the cusp of that other house, and that planet is to let one rip, the 12th house isn't going to smell it. It's that first house that's going to smell it. So the Sun, in our example, is standing over there at, what was it, 11 degrees, and it was 11 degrees, and the ascendant, no, the Sun was 12 degrees. Sun was 12 degrees, the ascendant is 15 degrees, which means 12 plus 15 would give me 17. So that Sun is within 5 degrees of that first house cusp. This is an ancient astrology rule, one of the oldest astrology rules there is, that a planet gives its power over to the next house if it is within 5 degrees of the following house. Similarly, the Neptune is at 11 degrees. If you add 5 to 11, we get 16. And so even the Neptune is operating from that first house. So we have Sun and Neptune within 5 degrees of the ascendant, and both Sun and Neptune, even though their physical body is in the 12th house, they are operating from the first. And that's how we do. And yes, there was a comment about whole sign houses. I have comments about whole sign houses that won't be shared or expressed this evening. But ultimately, if you stick around me long enough and you treat me nice enough, you'll hear my whole sign houses spiel, because there is a spiel and it's a really good one. But anyway, the point of life is that if we were using whole sign houses, which technically speaking, I'm greatly inclined not to, if we were to use whole sign houses, the Sun and Neptune would most assuredly be in the, what's that house called? In the first house. And usually when I'm in an argument with someone and I don't feel the urge to really explain myself, I say, by whole sign houses, it's in the first house, even though I technically don't believe that to be true, because I have internal theoretical and philosophical issues with whole sign houses. And there's a reason, a really good reason for that. Anyway, moving on. So I hope that answered that question. Also, recently, someone said to me in a Facebook group where I responded to a question, this person was like, my life is so awful because my Venus is in Scorpio in the 12th house. And I was like, no, your life is so awful because you have Venus in Scorpio in the first house. I didn't actually say it like that. But that was really the sentiment. No, you don't have a 12th house Venus in Scorpio. You have a first house Venus in Scorpio and blah, blah, blah. And then someone piped in was like, Mychal A. Bryan, that only applies to horary. That is absolutely untrue. And it's unfortunate that people are learning horary astrology and thinking that the rules that they're learning in horary only apply to horary. And while there are some rules that do only apply to horary, the 5-degree rule is not one of them. And at that point, I just have to step away and stop responding, because there is no talking to that person anymore, because they are so deeply caught up in their rightness, and I don't have the time or the inclination to convince anyone otherwise. So the 5-degree rule applies with the natal astrology. If you have planets within 5 degrees of the next house cusp, put the planets in that next house and see what your chart says after that. Anyway, so we have Sun, we have Neptune, and we have Mars all operating from the first house, which is good information for us to have. Next, that's our first thing. Next, we take the planets aspecting, not ascendant. Now, the planets, what we do at Oraculos is called rapid aspect spotting. So we've already sequestered these planets and they're already on the side as being in the ascendant. So I hold on to the degree of the ascendant and I rush around the chart until I find something close to that 15 degrees. I rush and I see the Saturn. The Saturn is a bit far for my liking. It's literally just roughly 9 degrees away. It's really far for me. So I'm not going to utilize it directly, because if that Saturn is going to come up, it's going to come up in another way. So the Saturn is a non-starter for me. The Jupiter is a non-starter for me. The node is a non-starter for me. The Chiron is a non-starter for me. Yes, I do use Chiron, but in a very specific way. The next node is obviously also a no. The Uranus is obviously also a no. The Pluto is not a no. So this person is having Pluto 60 to their ascendant. 60 because it's a sextile and I don't actually have a sextile symbol. And so 60 is how I would write that. So this person is having Pluto 60 to their ascendant. This moon and this part of fortune and this Venus and this Mercury are all no's, because all of this is occurring within a sign adjacent to that Scorpio ascendant, which means that they have no relationship, because we don't use semi-sextiles in traditional astrology unless you're Jean-Baptiste Morin, in which case you probably do, but we're not him. So technically, the only planet this person has aspecting their ascendant in any obvious way is that Pluto. And as well as, obviously, this is a chalk ton of information already, but the Pluto is obviously also doing things. The final place I would look before we start reading this chart is down here at the ascendant, and where the ascendant is by declination. And by declination, we have the ascendant at 16 degrees south, 29 minutes. That's how you read this. Ascendant is 16 degrees south, 29 minutes. And okay, we only give a 1 degree orb to declination. So the sun, wow, the sun is also there by declination at 15 degrees. So we'll call this hidden aspects, because you wouldn't have seen that directly. So the sun, we'll say, is parallel the ascendant. That's my parallel. Well, actually, if I've used it already up here, oh, let me do the pike instead of the, there we go. So the sun is parallel to the ascendant. And that's about it. Going down, the Mars is too far. So what we see here is even further confirmation that the sun is a very important thing within the life of the person, and that's our hidden aspects. We are done working with this ascendant, and we are now ready to interpret this chart. Okay, so this is the prelim. Questions? Any questions, queries, concerns? Yeah, Shannon.
Define what declination.
Hmm?
Could you define what declination means exactly?
Yes. So you have the equator. You have the equator. You have the ecliptic. The ecliptic is the path of the sun. Period. The ecliptic is our zodiac. So you have the equator. Well, this one. Yes. You have the equator, you have the ecliptic, and the ecliptic is our zodiac. That's the path that the sun, the apparent path of the sun around the earth. This, where it crosses, is about where the sun is right now at 0 degrees Aries. And this point up top here is 0 degrees Cancer. This point down here is 0 degrees Capricorn. And on the other side of this 0 degrees Aries would be 0 degrees Libra. So we have 0 degrees of our 4 cardinal signs. Parallel is not the same as anticial. There have been people who have said that that's the case, but it technically isn't the case, and we could see that in any chart that it's not the case. But let me just get back to this. So declination is measurement. So going up this way is north, going down this way is south, and declination is measurement north or south of the equator. So that means that if two things are here up top north in the same declination, those two things are considered to be parallel. If two things are down here south having the same declination, i.e. the sun 16 degrees south, ascendant 15 degrees south, we give it a 1 degree orb, those two things are parallel. If we have moon 5 degrees north, Uranus 5 degrees north, then we have a moon Uranus parallel or moon parallel Uranus. If we have something 5 degrees north and 5 degrees south, that's called a contra parallel. Does that make sense? It's like
that helped a little bit. Thank you.
Okay. Once again, tonight is the first night for a lot of these things, and we'll come back. The point is, it's like an aspect, and it's just as important as any other aspect. It's just as powerful as a conjunction, so we use them. Okay? Any other questions about what we did this evening? About why the ascendant, anything like that? Because usually there's a why the ascendant question. Are we all fine? We're fine. Okay. Yes, I just saw someone's hand. Yes? Is someone of... Oh, Lindsay, share the file. Which file are you sharing, Lindsay?
It's shows declination.
Oh, okay, cool. Good stuff.
If anyone wants to look at it.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. All right, so this basically is our anchor, and this is what we'll continuously come back to. in terms of we need to talk about all of these things on this list if we're going to talk about essentially the personality, the psychology of the person in question. After we've done this list, the next thing that we do is, I said last week to a group of students, we forget about it. And I saw how it had an automatically not nice effect on them. But technically, you put it to the back of your brain because you're going to come to the ascendant and you're going to do the ascendant, which is going to be the mode, the element, and the ruler. And it's actually the element, the mode, and the ruler. So here we have Scorpio, which is a fixed water sign ruled, a fixed water sign ruled by Mars. For all intents and purposes, for the rest of this workshop, for the next 12 weeks, Mars is ruling Scorpio, Saturn is ruling Aquarius, and Jupiter is ruling Pisces within the context of this class. And I posted a video about that on YouTube, and you can go and check that out if you like. It's like the second to last video I posted, which was why Saturn is the only ruler of Aquarius in traditional astrology. And I made sure to put that in traditional astrology part so that no one got offended. But why is Saturn the only ruler of Aquarius in traditional astrology? And there's reasons for that there. Okay. So we're talking about a fixed water sign ruled by Mars. The ascendant is going to show who you are meant to be based on the environment in which you're born. And oftentimes, that is all a person ever really resonates with in terms of who they know themselves to be. Because the ascendant represents the enculturated person who has been formed as a result of that person existing within the world. Your ascendant is formed from your local horizon, and your local horizon has an association with the space and the location of where you are, which is why the ascendant and everything we say about the ascendant is in relation to your location. Who am I based on this location? Who am I based on my household and home? Who am I based on who the world has framed me to be is what the ascendant is. Truthfully speaking, if we were to really investigate where is the individual spark of the person within the chart, we would truthfully go to the midheaven. Because whereas the ascendant is a function of the space where you are, the midheaven is a function of the specific moment in time when you're born. And for those of you who know how to calculate charts by hand, we calculate a chart by first finding the midheaven, and then the ascendant is a byproduct of the midheaven. The ascendant is a secondary factor to the midheaven. The midheaven has to be found first. If you're going to use a table of houses to calculate a chart, you find the midheaven first, and then the ascendant is a byproduct of the midheaven in the same way as the 12th house is a byproduct of the midheaven, the 11th house is a byproduct of the midheaven, the second house is a byproduct of the midheaven, the third house is a byproduct of the midheaven. The ascendant is also a byproduct of the midheaven in that sense. So if we were really to think about who is the who within this chart, we would be looking at the midheaven. But for all intents and purposes, we're not going to do that because that requires a lot more than what we're actually going to do tonight. And we're going to focus on the ascendant because that gives us what we need from a traditional perspective. So the ascendant shows the thrust of who this person will want to be within the world based on just who they want to be within the world, based on who the world tells them they should be. The ascendant is not necessarily going to be the person. It will show who the person wants to be within the world based on who the world tells them they should be. And then we have to go and we have to look in the chart and see where the ruler of the ascendant is to see whether or not that person's functioning within the world allows them to be supported in who it is they're trying to become. So This Mars is in Scorpio, which has complete relationship with this ascendant. So who this person is within the world is exactly who they are as a person. Versus if we had this Mars in Gemini, versus if we had this Mars in Cancer, versus if we had this Mars in Pisces, versus if we had this Mars in Taurus, who they would have wanted to have been will be augmented by who they end up being based on their interactions within the world. But here we have a complete agreement because our Mars is in Scorpio, our ascendant is in Scorpio, so we know that we're speaking from a very scorpionic sort of place. So the fixed water sign ruled by Mars. The water element will be the chief operating system for this person. And that's what the element of your rising sign is. It is the chief operating system for this person. I'm going to write that down. And as I spoke about water, I just felt the water in my body make a sudden descent. But the element of the ascendant represents the chief operating system of the native. We call the person who owns the chart the native because the chart itself is called the nativity. Nativity is the whole chart, the story of the birth of this person. So water being the chief operating system of this person says to us that it is within the nature of this person to always find the lowest depth from which to operate from within their life. Period. As a water statement. And that could be a singular water statement, but we really want to flesh out that understanding of water in relationship to the ascendant so that we can become very clear about the image that we're building of this person. So here we go. So we've already said that here's a person who wants to operate from the lowest possible depth within their life. They are a person, because they are inspired to operate from the lowest possible depth within their life, they may have the tendency to be a very internalized person, to be a very introverted person, and to really function from deep within themselves in a way that other people around them may not necessarily be able to understand. The watery imperative, this cold and wet imperative, which belongs to water, is something that always seeks to find peace and tranquility. And the peace and tranquility that the watery person is seeking to find within life is a direct product of them realizing and knowing that whenever even the slightest pebble drops within this tranquility that I've established for myself, it has a rippling effect on all aspects of my life. So water as an element is more permeable than other elements because the water is so deeply affected by even the slightest passing breeze. It causes a ruffling of the peace established by that watery person within themselves. So this is more than anything else the thing of I establish peace because that peace is fundamentally the greatest way in which I can function within the world. Whereas the fiery person doesn't necessarily need that. The airy person doesn't necessarily need that. The earthy person needs stability but not necessarily peace. The watery person requires a peace that truthfully passeth all understanding, because they know how volatile their moods can be erupted by virtue of the shifts and changes within their environment. So we've established this person operating from a place of non-tangible depth. And a part of that non-tangibility of that depth that they operate from is often nondescript as well. Now, one of the terms that the ancients give to all of the water signs, this is most assuredly a pop quiz now. No Oraculos person is to answer this question. I don't even know if you all know it, first year people. Second year people, you know it. But what is one of the terms the ancients have given to all of the water signs? Mute, most assuredly mute. I don't know why I have sweaty armpits, just block that from your memory. But mute. And the reason why the ancients call the water signs mute, is anyone knowing the reason why the ancients call the water signs mute? All of the signs of the zodiac are having some designation. There are signs that roar. There are signs that are mute. There are signs with half a voice. There are signs that are barren. There are signs that are fertile. There are signs that are four-legged. There are signs that are humane. There are signs that are bestial. There are signs that are fruitful. All of these different designations of the signs of the zodiac, and these designations of the signs of the zodiac, they come into our interpretation. The watery signs are all called mute because none of the three watery signs has the ability to express a voice. A crab doesn't talk. A scorpion doesn't talk. And neither do fish. I mean, they go, mum is the sound. But the fish is also not talking. That's not talking, that's just mumming. So that is the reason why all of the water signs are called mute. And what you will find is that within the person who is very much water-based by virtue of their ascendant, notice that I'm not counting how many planets this person has in water. I'm specifically speaking through the ascendant itself. Ascendant being in water, chart ruler being in water for me are both sufficient enough for me to say that this is a watery person. I don't need to count and see this person has 10 planets in water, 2 planets in, no. So there's that. Now, the depth of water is more so, I'm talking about all water signs. And that's a very good question, Ruth, because at this moment, my delineation hasn't left yet water. I'm still just talking about water and describing that. Now, this mute quality of the water signs is also there, and it's speaking about that depth that I spoke about earlier that the watery person is operating from. Because when you're operating from such a deep place of profundity within yourself, where you're wanting to communicate or you're wanting to essentially communicate something that is so deep, words oftentimes fail to express that. You see? So as a result of the watery element already operating from such a deep way, words don't necessarily have the ability to articulate the sort of things that the watery person is feeling within themselves. So the water element is pre-verbal. You understand? If we take this Kabbalistically, water is coming before air. The air element is when we actually begin to put things into perspective and put a plan and we can describe things, but water is pre-verbal. So water is that stage of the child's development where the child is saying, I feel, or I want this. And I want this is oftentimes, why do you want that? You can't ask a baby why they want that. I just want it because I feel like. And that because I feel like is such a strong motivational factor within the heart of the watery person that is where the buck stops. I don't need to explain to you why I feel. I don't need to find a way to put into words why I feel what I feel. I feel this way. And that is it. And oftentimes when you're speaking to a person who is having this very deep watery inclination or this very deep watery overlay, that is where it stops. And to try to get a deeper explanation, to try to force that person over there to talk, they may be able to talk, but the words ultimately gurgle up out of them like what do they call the babbling brook. And that babbling brook effect is oftentimes the words topple on top of each other, is it not? With the babbling brook, they topple on top of each other and they flow and they come gushing forward. And then what you end up with is a babbling brook of words and still confusion. So the watery type of communication is either the inability to communicate at all because they are operating from a place within themselves that is absolutely pre-verbal, or the overemphasis on the communicative faculty that comes out like the babbling brook, where they talk and talk and talk, and at the beginning it feels like you're going to get somewhere. At the beginning, it feels like, okay, I have this person talking, we're going to get somewhere. And they talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And before you know it, 30 minutes have passed and the babbling brook has babbled on. And the clarity that you thought you had has completely been washed away. Because that is the nature of water communication. Give them a canvas, give them an easel, give them a what you call it, give them a something to go paint or something, and so that becomes a form of how they express themselves, because that creative process is a far greater vehicle of the expression of that watery native than is the speech process. Anyway, don't take my word for it. All right, Jason is saying the concord between the ascendant ruler and the rising sign indicates that they will be able, yes, 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 or there's a yes to all of the above. You get the golden pony. That is absolutely correct. The fact that the chart ruler is also in that Scorpio says that the nature of this person has not been augmented. You understand? So this person is what you see is what you get. To a large degree, because there's other augmenting factors going on here. Now, at this moment within my investigation, I'm deeply concerned to find more water. Because, like that's just what, that now that I've hooked, I started algebra classes today because I'm going back to university in not this September, but probably in January. And one of the prerequisites for the course that I'm going to take, well, for the PhD program I'm going to enroll in, is algebra and chemistry and physics. And I'll read for you what my algebra teacher said to me today. Because as I was reading it, I was like, oh my God, this is astrology. If I turn it into astrology in my mind, it makes sense. He said to me, when we solve a math problem, we are supposed to move from difficult to simple. When you read a chart, you're supposed to move from difficult to simple, which means that once you sink your teeth into a very specific perspective within that chart that has a precedent within that chart itself, you follow that. Because that golden thread will reveal itself to you, and that golden thread will take you home. If your chart has provided you a pathway, you go down that pathway. Okay? Anyway, so we're moving from difficult to simple, and we've already established water as being one of the chief operating system of this person. Period. Let's continue. I'm so excited. Now, the next stage of this is we've spoken about the water thing. We've spoken up water to the greatest possible level. Now we have to bring in the fact that it is fixed water. Let me just give you a little tiny thing. You technically don't need to ever invest in an astrology book on the signs of the zodiac to understand anything about the signs of the zodiac. What you need to do is understand what cardinal, fixed, and mutable means in expression, and you also need to spend time in nature, and you need to look at the ocean, and look at the lake, and look at the river, and contemplate how those three bodies of water are different from each other, and look at the rain, and turn on your shower, and look at the bath, look at the dishwater when you're washing your dishes, and see what the function of water is, and flush the toilet, and see what the function of water is, and observe the elements in their raw form within the world, but also observe the elements within your daily life. And that is how you build your understanding of astrology. What is occurring today within the world, and I'm sorry for not reading the chart, I'll get back to it, but what I see very often, and people hate when I say this because I talk about the kids, what I see the kids doing, and they're like, aren't you a kid? I've been around the block a bit, and I practiced astrology for a very long time in relation to the span of my life. But what I see the kids doing is they simply regurgitate things that they've read in somebody's book without actually sinking their teeth into the reality of they themselves becoming a natural philosopher and observing astrology within the world. This is the first generation where astrology has been so cerebral and so disconnected to the world around us. And by first generation, I'm referring to in the last 100 years. We are the first generation of astrologers who can have a complete astrological practice without ever yet going out and looking at the night sky. This is not the way. If we are meant to really understand and have a deeply embodied understanding of these forces of nature because that's what we're doing. We're talking about the titanic forces of nature in dynamic interaction and how they specifically influence our lives. If we're meant to have that understanding, we have to find those forces of nature where they are, which is within nature itself. This is a must, truthfully. Anyway, so we come back over here and we see that this person is a fixed water person. Now, the fixity within the heart of the Scorpio is truly a remarkable thing to behold, because the fixity within the heart of the Scorpio it turns the watery desire to find the lowest depth to a desire on the part of this person to sink to the lowest depth. And that sinking effect that we find in Scorpio is a truly, truly, truly interesting and marvelous thing, because what it means on one level is that they can gather the internal force of everything that is non-tangible within them and channel it within one direction if they so desire to do so. Because that is the fixity, that is the gravity. There is a gravitas within Scorpio that is only comparable to the gravitas that we find within Taurus, that is only comparable to the gravitas that we find within Saturn rule signs of Capricorn and Aquarius. So these fixed signs of Scorpio, as well as Taurus, as well as Capricorn isn't necessarily a fixed sign, but insofar as cardinal signs are concerned, Capricorn is the most fixed of the cardinal signs by virtue of its earthy disposition, in the same way as Virgo is the most fixed of the mutable signs by virtue of its earthy disposition. Scorpio has the effect of freezing and sinking and finding the lowest, the most reserved, the darkest hole in which to establish itself. Now, this is a wonderful thing for the internal life of the monk or the hermit or someone who's wanting that. But in daily existence, where we have to exist and interact with each other, that sinking quality that we find within the heart of the Scorpio is something that, and I'm also being mindful to be gentle with language, but it's something that causes them to be too ready and too willing to stay where they are. And when we say stay where they are, what are they sinking in? They're sinking in water. And what does that water represent? That water represents their emotional heart content. And so when that sinking is occurring, what we find is that the Scorpio, already being this cold and wet sign of the zodiac, because that's what water is phlegmatic and phlegm is cold and wet, can settle into an emotional feeling space that is deep, that is oftentimes depressive, and that oftentimes has a level of gravity where it feels far too intense. So when we talk about the Scorpio feeling very intensely, what we're essentially talking about is this fixed disposition over the heart of the Scorpio that causes it to always go for the lowest feeling place. And the lowest feeling place could be a very low and deep resonant vibration of love, and me establishing and rooting my heels on that and wishing beyond all wishes to never be moved from that place. But the other side of that is the lowest feeling place can oftentimes be those emotions that also carry a great amount of gravity. So when we think about emotions that carry gravity, we think about sadness being an emotion that carries a feeling of heaviness, a feeling of being burdened, a feeling of being weighed down. We also think of depression, and we know that depression isn't an emotion, but depression is more of a state. We also think of depression as being one of these things that is feeling heavy, that is feeling as if it is not allowing me to be able to rise myself back above the water, essentially. Something that I heard someone say before, not in relation to Scorpio, but in relation to life, was, how long can you keep your head above water before you drown, essentially? And oftentimes when it comes to the scorpionic influence, because that fixed nature is like having an anchor attached to you, It's like having an anchor attached to you, pulling you down to the bottom of the ocean. There is a sense of how long can I tread water before the weight of that pulls me down into myself. Wherever my resting place is, hopefully the resting place is a place of love. Hopefully that resting place is a place of devotion. And this is why we find the Scorpionic person being able to work so well within the world and being able to be such a hard worker within the world, because once they devote themselves to something, that devotion carries them forward, and they will never sway their devotions once they have devoted and committed their loyalties to something, because that is the nature of the fixed water. I freeze myself within this particular moment in time. I freeze myself within this particular feeling space, because this feeling space has become my entire world. I have submerged myself over there. That is fine and dandy for love. However, we're still talking about a water sign, and we're still talking about a changeable world around us. The world is a world of constant flux and reflux, which makes it very difficult for the person who is very fixed to function in a world like that. Because those loves don't last forever. And it may not be that it doesn't last forever for you. It might be that the other person's loyalties have shifted when you have established your whole life there. Those loves don't last forever. Those feelings don't last forever. Those passions don't last forever, oftentimes on the part of the other person. And then it leaves you, the Scorpionic person, having all of these feelings within yourself, feeling a sense of deep abandonment, because you have established and built your house on this feeling nature that you've established with this other person, and here they are no longer there. Which is why the opposite to that devotion that the Scorpionic person can oftentimes feel is and I'm trying to be once again mindful of language, because I realize that we all don't come from a traditional background, and I don't want to use these heavy traditional words, but it's oftentimes why that Scorpionic experience can be like a deep darkness or a deep resounding sorrow within the heart of a person, because they are so familiar as being the fixed water sign. They're so familiar with that experience of loss. And that experience of loss comes up when they establish their roots or when they dig their heels within things that surely change. Which is why Scorpio, of the signs of the zodiac, Taurus could be included in this, but not so much. But the Scorpio of the signs of the zodiac, by virtue of this fixed water nature, that hurt, when that happens, it lasts longer and it lingers in a more deeper way, because that hurt is proportional to the amount of their own emotional investment in whatever it is they were a part of. We move on. Now we speak about it being ruled by Mars thing. And the reason why I'm talking so much about the Scorpio thing is because I think that when it comes to teaching this sort of course, where people are coming from different astrological backgrounds, we all have a sense of agreement about the signs of the zodiac. Rulership might take us down a great debate, but we all basically have a sense of agreement about the signs of the zodiac. So this is one of the ways how we would traditionally hold and treat the signs of the zodiac. Now, the Mars rulership of Scorpio is a part of the ferocity that we find within the Scorpionic native. And that ferocity allows that person to completely double down within a particular course of action, even if the world around them is shattering apart. The Scorpionic person has the ability to hold on to the course of action that they've dedicated themselves to by virtue of the fearlessness that is held within that Mars. The ancients, and by ancients I'm not even going that far back, but John Gadbury and William Lilly, and they're really not that ancient, that's just 400 years ago. John Gadbury and William Lilly said that the Martian person fears no one, neither man nor God. And this is something of the Scorpionic nature. The Scorpionic person fears no one, neither man nor God, because that fixed water nature and the realities of the losses that come through that fixed water nature allow them to realize that there is no fear that I have within my heart that prevents me from actually doing what it is I desire to do within the world. So we find a fearlessness attached to the Scorpionic person. We also find a little bit of a devil may care attached to the Scorpionic person by virtue of this Mars, this warrior, this Martian imposition, and the power that is held within that. And the way in which that Martian drive causes them to be deeply devoted, deeply loyal, but also ruthless, essentially, when it comes to exacting revenge, because we know that that is something that we generally think about in terms of the Scorpionic native as well. So all of these things are there within the heart of the Scorpio. Who will jump into the burning building to save the person? It's probably going to be this person because of the Mars rising, knowing no fear within themselves. Now that we've taken care of that, the Mars is in Scorpio, so everything we would have said about the Scorpio before, we say it about this person now. Now, the other thing that we have about this is that this person also has the Sun there. And the Sun here is a very wonderful thing because the Sun augments some of this Scorpionic nature, and it gives them a bit of lightness, it gives them a little bit more joy, and it gives them the ability to rise above some of the heavy implications that we find within the Scorpionic nature as a standalone factor. When we have the Sun rising, the Sun is hot and dry as a planet, and so the Sun brings warmth and magnanimity and the big-heartedness to this person. Warmth, open-heartedness, and the ability to love everyone, and the ability to be noble within the world. So with the Sun here, even though this person may be a fierce Martian warrior type, the Sun here rededicates that Mars energy, and it causes that Mars energy to not necessarily be softened, but it causes it to be committed to something higher than Mars itself, which is a lovely thing, because it takes off some of that Scorpionic edginess that we might have had with Scorpio as a standalone factor within itself. Now, the next thing that we have here is, so we've spoken about the Sun. So that is speaking about the Sun as a planet and what the planet of the Sun brings to the person. But it's not just what the planet of the Sun brings to a person by virtue of the nature of the Sun. We also have to see what houses does this Sun rule. We should have done that for the Mars as well. So here within this chart, we see that Mars is ruling the 6th house. Now, pop quiz. What does the 6th house represent? You can answer however you like. Ruth?
Ill health. Ill health.
Ill health is one. Okay. Anything else? Service.
Daily work.
What do you say, Shannon?
Just day-to-day work.
Day-to-day work. Okay, so seeing some multiplicity in this 6th house definition. And I think Kathy said service. West, what do you want to add?
Well, I had said work and health and the thing, but also not teaching in the 9th house university sense, but sort of a master-student relationship sometimes falls in the 6th.
The 6th house. Oh, I think you're talking about like an apprenticeship sort of thing?
Yes.
Interesting. I've never, ever heard that in my life. And I find that interesting, and I find it interesting, and that's it. But thank you for giving me that, because now I'm going to think about that for like the next 10 years. So,
well, it's part of the process to mastery, and mastery is part of the 6th house thing.
okay, good stuff. Awesome sauce. So following this common theme of within traditional astrology, the 6th house is a house of sickness as well as a house of servitude, but it's also a house of the work that you do that no one's actually grateful for. It's like, who is like the people who, when we think about essential workers, for a large part of it, people were thinking that that specifically meant the doctors and the nurses, but it also means the garbage disposal people who are throwing out the trash, basically, because if they're not throwing out the trash, we'll end up with a contamination situation on top of already having a COVID situation. So the 6th house is the house of work to which I receive no gratitude from a purely traditional astrology perspective, and yet other perspectives are also, if they are valid within those traditions, then it's valid within those traditions. Now, when we have the ruler of the sixth house in the first house, it brings the things of the sixth house to the first house. However, this Mars is in its own sign, which is a lovely thing. We love to see it, because what that means for us, first of all, we ask ourselves, well, hey, does this mean that this person is sick? Not necessarily, because we have a pretty robust Mars here. So this person is probably also having a pretty robust sense of their own health, or even if they do get sick, they bounce back because of the robust nature of the health that they hold, is one component of that Mars. Now, the next component of this Mars is that it does rule the sixth house. So if we've kind of taken away Mars's ability to rule sickness, then what else are we left with? What we're left with is the person who essentially stands in the role of the servant leader. And what servant leader means is this is the person who owns the company but can still be found on the weekend sweeping out the building. This is the person who hasn't actually separated themselves from the day-to-day servitude functions of the work that they do. And usually within the life of a person, this can manifest as a great deal of stress because that person ends up being a deep workaholic. Now, what have we said already about this person by virtue of the Scorpio? We've already spoken about something having to do with the relentless way in which this person has the ability to dedicate themselves to things. And so here, what we're finding in the chart is confirmation. And we all know that astrologically speaking, if you can say something 3 ways, it becomes a rule. Yes? So in astrology, we just need to be able to say something 3 times and it's a rule. So we have many indications that this person is a workaholic. One of the indications is that the ruler of the sixth house is here robustly in the first house, i.e. I work my ass off consistently. My work is a great and an enormous source of strength, a source of stress consistently, but I am deeply identified with the stress of my work. The sixth house is also a house of stress. In the 21st century, if we don't want to talk about the sixth house as a house of sickness, because whoever wants to predict sickness within the life of a person, other than those miserable traditional astrologers, if we don't want to talk about stress specifically within the life of a person, or if we don't want to talk about sickness within the life of a person, we talk about stress, that I am deeply identified with my stresses. Why? Because anything that is within this first house is going to be something that you're deeply identified with. Because this is like your badge, like you know, your Scout's honor, and this is the badges that you wear. So I am deeply identified with my stresses, but I love it. I love it. Why do we say this person loves it? Anyone? Is anyone knowing? Don't answer all at once, please.
Because that's who they want to be.
Because that is where it wants to be by virtue of Mars being the ruler of both the first house as well as the ruler of the sixth house, and Mars being in its own sign in Scorpio. So when you have a planet ruling 2 houses, you have to find a way to merge the meanings of those 2 houses. So when we see this Mars ruling the first and the sixth, that means that the meanings of the first and the sixth are merged. My stresses and my well-being, first and the sixth, are deeply interwoven into the pattern of who I am. And these stresses are a very big and real thing over my life. I identify wholeheartedly with those stresses. I probably always talk about those stresses, but I love them. I love them because who would I be without this stressful work that I do? You understand? That's what this person is saying to the world. Now, stressful work that I do is that Mars, but also stressful work that I do is the Sun. Why? Because the Sun is ruling the 10th house, And if we have the ruler of a house within a house, that ruler takes the meanings of that house with it. So Sun in the first house is this person came flying out of the uterus with a briefcase in their hand because this person's entire life has to do with their work and their profession. Everything they know about themselves is caught up within the notions of their work and their profession. And a large part of their identity is caught up within their work and their profession because that is all that they've ever possibly aspired to be, their work and their profession. It's a very big thing. I shine within the world through this work that I'm doing. And by virtue of this work that I'm doing within the world, I know who I am. Not everybody has that as a chip on their shoulder. I can assure you of that. There are some very lazy people within the world, and this person is not necessarily one of them. Not a bumblecleat. And the reason why this person isn't one of them is because what I do now, so I've just established that I don't think this person is a lazy person at all. So what do I have to go and do now to corroborate that thing that I just said? I look and I see, do I see laziness in this chart? So I go and I look. Let's look together. I go to the declination table and I find, lo and behold, we have Mars, Pluto. Ha ha! Lo and behold, we have Mars, Pluto, Jupiter, because remember we give our declination a 1 degree orb. So we have Mars, Pluto contraparallel, and we have Mars, Jupiter parallel, and we have Pluto, Jupiter contraparallel. The point is we basically have a Mars, Pluto, Jupiter conjunction. So, my dearly beloveds, what might you say about someone who has a Mars, Pluto, Jupiter conjunction?
I don't know when to stop.
They don't know when to stop. Great. Shannon, you next.
They might be very competitive.
They might be very competitive. Good. Anyone else? West?
They like power.
They like power. Exactly. Exactly. Now, something that we have to understand, who the hell is in my ceiling? Oh, Jesus Christ, Daddy. Why? Oh, okay. I'm teaching a class. Okay. Sorry. As I was saying, what was I saying? The Mars Pluto, can you hear him? As I was saying, the Mars Pluto. What was I saying, anyone?
Mars, Pluto,
Conjunction,
Jupiter.
you were
Power.
asking what they thought about the conjunction.
Yes, and then I was making a point. Shannon, what was the point I was making?
What
Scorpio.
a Mars, Pluto, Jupiter.
Scorpio. No, I came back to the Scorpio point.
Oh.
And the Scorpio point is that if the world was to blow up tomorrow, the people who would survive, not two. If the world was to blow up tomorrow, the people who would survive would be the Saturnian people, the proper Scorpionic people, and the Plutonian people. And the roaches, because if the world was to blow up, the roaches would still survive. Did you know that a roach could survive an atomic bomb? The whole roach species would still be here. So you would have the Scorpios, the Plutonians, and the roaches, and the Saturnian people, because Saturn people will definitely be building back the world. And so here we see within the heart of this person, this Mars-Pluto, and the Mars-Pluto is an excess of intensity within the heart of this person. And that excess of intensity causes this person to lean forward no matter what. Now, this is interesting, this leaning forward no matter what. And what's also interesting about this chart is that it seems so different to all of the Libra things we have going on. And here is a conundrum that this person is facing within their personal life, because they have all of this, but they also have all of this. And this is the place at which this person finds themselves torn within themselves. Because the question then becomes, Who should I be within the world? Should I be these planets or should I be these planets? Now, there's a reason within my mind why this person is leaning a little bit more so in the direction of the Libra situation, and it's because of the Sun-Neptune conjunction, both operating from the first house. The Sun-Neptune causes a person to be porous in a way where the Sun-Neptune causes a person to be porous in a way where they're not necessarily knowing who they are specifically as a person. And this is a wonderful thing for if someone was an actor and someone was in an art form that required me to lose myself completely within the role of that character that I was playing. But Sun-Neptune becomes a very stressful thing over the life of a person because that person ends up not necessarily knowing who they are, who they should be, how they should function within the world, because the Sun-Neptune is so deeply connected with parts of this reality that are not of this world, that this is a person who has the ability to get deeply lost within themselves in a way where they oftentimes find it very difficult to come out. And this is something that is oftentimes or can oftentimes be drug-induced. So that can be through alcohol, that can be through other forms of narcotics, that can be through any of the things that cause me to disappear deeply within the heart of myself, to have an internal experience. And oftentimes, some of the quote-unquote trauma that we find within the life of a person who is having this situation is such that they do want to escape via alcohol, narcotics, drugs. Even relationships become a point of escape for them because there's a fundamental piece within them that is potentially painful that they're trying to run from or that they're not trying to be completely present with. Now they're having Neptune, Sun, and Sun is ruling their 10th house. And so what that's meaning, or what that could mean, is that my work becomes a fundamental place of escape within my life. Now, this is an important thing to realize because Neptune is also a great destroyer. Neptune can operate benefically, but when it comes to Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, the tendency within their lives is to operate malefically. So here we find the person deeply associated with the work that they're doing, and they invest their whole life, heart, mind, and body into that work. But that work is being Neptuned. What does it mean for my work to be Neptuned? Well, it means that that work that I'm investing myself so deeply into, it gets washed away, or it has the ability to get washed away. And in that process of the work being washed away that I'm doing, if the work isn't there, to a very large degree, this person isn't there. You understand? Because we've already said that this is a person whose entire concept of their identity is caught up within that solar work that they're doing. So if the work isn't there, to a large degree, this person isn't there. And if they are working in fields that require them to not be there, i.e., if this person is a nun, or if this person is a monk, or if this person is working specifically in a spiritual field that requires the complete loss of self, then this could be a very wonderful combination. But if they're working in a field that does not require the loss of self, and if they're working in a regular schmegular job and their job is being Neptuned, and it's not pharmaceuticals that they're working in, then this Sun-Neptune becomes a very big problem. Because one, my work becomes a means of escape, but also two, my work becomes something that I don't bounce back from if that work gets taken away from me. And the Neptune there with the work has the tendency to take the work away in ways that are both strange and interesting. So that's the Sun-Neptune situation in relationship to their work. And we already know that this is a high-stress sort of person who is willing to work in high-stress sorts of environments to begin with. Now we move on from this. I'll spend 5 more minutes here, and then I'll give the chart over to whoever the chart is belonging to in order for that person to interpret the chart. Now, the next thing that we see here is, well, let me just tell you what we would do next. We would go to the 2nd house to talk about this person's monetary life. Then we go to the 3rd house, then we go to the 4th house, and we make our way counterclockwise around the chart entirely. But we're not going to do that this evening because we're only focusing on the things that specifically impact both soul and psyche. So the next thing that we're going to do is we must look at this Libra situation and why this person feels the way they feel about love, which isn't necessarily the best way in the world. The 12th house, traditionally speaking, well, tell me the 12th house definitions, then I'll wrap this up with this, and then we can have the big reveal. Would this give me some 12th house stuff? Yes, Ruth?
Your own worst enemy. You are your own worst enemy.
That too, self-undoing. Anyone else? 12th house?
Collective unconscious.
Collective unconscious. Spirituality. Anyone
Things
else?
things hidden from the native.
Things hidden from the native. Anyone else? Drop it in. Let me know. No. Okay, sweaty armpits again. Sorry about that. The 12th house, traditionally speaking, is your self-undoing on one level. It is also hidden enemies on another level. It is a place of solitude. And so for that reason, if a person is working in a nunnery, then the 12th house could be applicable because it is a place of solitude. And like I said about this person already, they always seek the lowest low, and the Neptune there causes them to have a sense of boundarylessness as they move throughout the world. And that boundarylessness is a little bit of a problem because the boundarylessness means that I'm overly permeable. I'm too easily touched. And by virtue of how deeply sensitive I am, by virtue of being so easily touched, I don't know where my body ends and where the world begins. So it's that sort of thing. So it is as if this person is moving through the world without skin. And that movement through the world without skin, through the Sun-Neptune, through the Scorpio disposition already, is causing the person to want to be even more well-guarded and even more armored, because it is that armoring that they need to pull forward more than anything else, because their sensitivity within this lifetime has been their greatest cross to bear as they move throughout the world. The 12th house as a house of my hidden enemies is a peculiar one because we want to see what's going on in this 12th house. In this person's 12th house, they're having the ruler of their ninth, the ruler of their 7th house is also the ruler of their 12th house. And we see their 7th house ruler placed here within the 12th house, which leads us to the belief that love has been an extraordinarily difficult uphill climb for this person within this lifetime. Now, that is one confirmation of a story, but we know that astrologically speaking, we need to be able to say something at least 3 ways. So the other thing that we automatically see is that this person is also having Venus square Saturn, and Venus square Saturn, as we know, both of which are strong, by the way. Venus square Saturn, as we know, is this symbol that says that the sweetness associated with love is taken away for whatever reason there is, or there is a sense of a transactionality in association with love and my ability to love and be loved. There is a sense of delay in terms of my ability to love and be loved, and potentially my search for love is what has me in the doghouse. Everybody loves to talk about Moon and Libra. Moon and Libra as a standalone factor is nice and lovely and all of the things, but Moon and Libra is also an indecisive heart. And the Moon and Libra situation, and Libra as an entire situation, as a point of indecision, yes, it is amenable to friendships and amenable to relationships, but it is also a cardinal sign, and the cardinality is one that requires change. And so the relationships within the life of this person may constantly be movable and may constantly be changing as well, which is another bit of a problem. Now, if we use the Venus, and this is my last thing I'm going to say about this, if we use the Venus as representing the lover that this person will ultimately meet, that Venus is in the 12th house, which is not necessarily the best place in the world for you, and it's not necessarily the best place in the world for them, because your 12th house is your partner's 6th house. And your partner being in their 6th house can mean one of several things. One, it could mean that your partner is quote unquote sick for whatever reason, but it could also mean that your partner is possibly also a workaholic just like you and also associating themselves deeply with their work. But that's like the PG-13 version. Venus in your 12th house ruling your 7th house of partners is saying that my partners oftentimes act within my life in a 12th house sort of way. The 12th house is also a house that we cannot see. And when it comes to the 12th house, there are two things we put in the 12th house. Things we never want anybody to see or know, and dead people. Dead people go in the 12th house, and things we are trying to hide from people go in the 12th house. And here we have the partner in the 12th house. And the partner is in Libra. Venus is in Libra, which is technically a very good placement for that Venus to be in. So we have to ask ourselves, what about this partner am I hiding from the world that I do not want anybody else to see? Period. One. Secondly, this person is also needing to ask themselves, what about my partner is my father fundamentally in great disagreement with? And we say father because the father is ruling that 4th house down there, because father, the 4th house is father in traditional astrology. The father is ruling the 4th house down here, and that father is having this hard aspect, this square with my partner in my 12th house. So am I attempting to hide my partner from my father could be one thing, or do my partner and my father have a constant sense of bucking heads or a warfare between them could be another thing. But then the ultimate thing is, but my father as a standalone factor wasn't necessarily the most visible sort of person within my own life, because here is my father in his own 12th house, i.e. the 3rd house is the 12th house of the 4th house. I have South Node there, I have Chiron there, all of which are representing my household experience. So my father also doesn't seem to be a very big impact within my own life, because my father is somewhere tucked away and disappeared within his own 12th house. And as a result of that, my mother, i.e. the 10th house, because the 10th house is also the mother, my mother ends up being the person who I cling on to for dear life, because my mother ends up being the rock within this household. And at the same time, the Neptunizing my mother means that my mother, for whatever she's gone through in terms of her relationship with my father, my mother may be Neptunized to the point of me not even really having access to her. So I hold on to the idealized image of who my mother should be, because technically speaking, she's probably the parent that I have within my life to hold on to. But at the same time, even then, there's this Neptunian overlay on my mother that creates a weird relationship between me and mom that doesn't actually allow her to really be the champion of stability either, even though she is the rock within my life. Okay, that's that. So, who was this chart submitted by? Kathy, this chart was someone you know well?
It's actually my turn.
Oh. Okay, Kathy, on a scale of 1 to 10, how accurate was that for you?
Very, very accurate. I blew my mind with that last part. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay.
No, the last part with the parents was very interesting, because my father died at 7. So I was raised by my mother, who was mentally ill and in and out of institutions. So
Okay.
yeah, very, very mind-blowing there, yeah.
Okay. So, wow. 1, and thank you for sharing that with us. 2, and secondly, let's just take one tiny look at that because of the Sun-Neptune. And the Sun-Neptune is that, essentially. If the sun in this chart is representing the mother, which it does because the mother is the 10th house, then we have mom being the singular point of great influence within my life, because mom is on my first house, but also mom is with Neptune, you see? And that's where we get that definition from in terms of that relationship. So, and now all of you, any questions, queries, concerns, or complaints? Because I know I say things sometimes that people don't like, chief amongst which is your father is your 4th house and your mom is your 10th house, but you just saw living proof that there is no way I could have turned that around, because that would not have been the case within this chart. So,
Can I just ask, could we have seen the loss of the father at that age due to solar arcs, like what you talked about? Is that something you would consider?
it's something I would do, especially when someone has such an age-specific thing. It's something I would do, and if we poke around a bit, there is going to be something in this chart that if we move it forward by 7 degrees, it's going to hit something else that's going to give us a Plutonian sort of event. So yes, thank you very much for sharing, Kathy. It definitely means a lot to us to have you share, and you know, it's a really vulnerable thing to do. So we are very, very, very appreciative to learn through you, because that's what we're doing. We're learning astrology through each other, and it's a powerful thing to do. So thank you so much. All right, so any other questions, queries, concerns, something that I may have done within this reading that you need some clarity on, so you can go out and try to hold this information within yourself?
Yeah, I had a question about.
Okay, so go Jason and then Ruth. Yes, Jason.
Yeah, I guess I was trying to follow when you were getting into the Neptune significations, and it just seemed like everything that you had covered up to that point already showed this really intense degree of identification with work. So I guess there's a missing piece somewhere for me about like what Neptune adds to the identification with work that's already there without Neptune, it seems like.
Confirmation is what Neptune adds. Confirmation is what Neptune adds. And Neptune, if we had to give Neptune an element to be ruling or whatever, it would be water. And you know, this concept of Neptune, there are 2 waves within traditional astrology. One of the waves is the wave of we don't use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto because because of all of that. And then there's the other wave, which is supported by people like myself and Rob Hand and Lee Lehman and Deb Holding and many great traditional astrologers who are thoroughly trained in traditional astrology, where we use the outer planets, but we use the outer planets in terms of their tight relationship to important natal factors. So the Neptune is also standing as a point of spirituality. That's another thing that Neptune brings, which we haven't really spoken about a lot, because I wanted to focus more on the concrete delineation of things. But the Neptune is there, and the Neptune does talk about the work, but that Neptune talks a lot about the maternal influence. And if that Neptune wasn't there, I would have had to have worked a lot more harder to come to that specific delineation about the mother than would have been necessary, you know? So it's to each their own in terms of, you know, whether we use the outer planets or not, but I'm a strong outer planet user like most of my colleagues, and they work basically, you know? So that is it. Was that, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I guess the meditation for myself is like, how would this, like, what shade of delineation is removed if we were to take if Neptune were somewhere else in the chart or non-existent?
It's a great question, and those are questions I asked myself a very long time ago. And once again, you come here, and this is a real speculative thing. You come here, you see a chart read, you go home. It's like watching Netflix. Instead, you're not watching Netflix. You're seeing me put my entire reputation on the line by reading someone's chart blind. And technically, when you do a blind chart reading, or when you come to watch one of these, you're slightly inside yourself hoping that I fail, because this is very risky business to read someone's chart without knowing anything about them at all. But everything that I say, I've tested. Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, I've tested. I've also tested doing without Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and it works as well. But they're there, they're impactful, and they make a world of a difference within our chart delineation. And at this point in my life, I'm just not concerned with trying to not use things that I know work. And I don't know they work. I don't know they work because they theoretically work. I know they work because I've seen them work in thousands of charts, you see?
Yeah, I hear all that, and it's not like it's not a question of whether you use or not. It's just in a hypothetical delineation, if the chart had those factors in place, but Neptune, like if it were possible, it's not. I mean, somewhere else entirely in the chart and not conjunct the sun that close to the ascendant. Like maybe this, I don't know, just off the top of my head, like maybe this person, their feelings around work and their identity to work has like higher meaning rather than just like a personality meaning, like a spiritualized like sense of what work is. But that's just sort of me riffing. But that's what we're trying to figure out, like what Neptune added exactly. But yeah, thanks.
Okay, you're very welcome. What it definitely added was a great deal of information in relationship to the story about the mother, and that's something that I hold as being very valuable information. And hypothetically speaking, anything within the chart can be anywhere. That's what the whole of astrology is, that anything within a chart could be anywhere, and it's not. It happens to be where it is because that happens to be the greatest expression of your personal story that can possibly be told. And so everything within our astrology is purposefully placed because our astrology is the telling of a life in planetary terms. So yeah, so that's my view of the whole thing. And you do what feels comfortable to you at the end of the day, but don't do it from the place of hypotheses and what hypothetically might happen. Do it from reality and then see whether or not it works for you or not. And then if it doesn't, you just throw it away. All right, other questions, queries, concerns about this evening? Hey, Kathy.
Yes, so do you always use the sun as the mother and are you using the moon as the father, or where are we getting that?
Okay, cool. I'll show you that. The reason why I use the sun as the mother is because the sun is ruling the 10th house. And in traditional astrology, the 10th house is the mother. Okay. So the sun, because it rules the 10th house and is here in the first house, is the mother. The father doesn't naturally swap. I understand what you're saying, because you're saying, isn't my mom supposed to be the moon and isn't my dad supposed to be? No, that's not how that operates. The ruler of your 10th house is your mother, and the ruler of your 4th house is your father. That's how that works in traditional astrology. Okay. So Saturn ruling this 4th house is the father. And once again, this is another thing with rulership. If I had used this Uranus as being the ruler of your father, because Uranus, quote unquote, rules Aquarius, I would have been completely wrong in terms of my delineation about your dad, because it just would have been very wrong, basically. Your dad not necessarily being accessible is because he's here in his 12th house, and that is what I worked off of, versus him being here in your 10th house, which makes him the most important and the most impactful. I mean, there's a whole delineation there. So the ruler of your 10th house is your mother, the ruler of your 4th house is your father, and then that gets even more nuanced later on when we start to go into the topic of like triplicity rulers and all that stuff. But for right now, leave this space knowing that who rules my 10th house is my mom, who rules my 4th house is my dad. Okay.
Hello, Mychal. This was delightful. Thank you so much. The sense of the ascendant, and we're putting so much, emphasis in traditional astrology on the ascendant. I have always thought of it as the, steer of the helm of the ship, the physical body. And now this adding to it as, you know, who you're meant to be in the environment from which you are born. I'm just trying to consolidate this. And if you just want to riff a little more on the ascendant, I'd love it.
Okay. The ascendant, traditionally speaking, is the soul. The Vedic astrologers call the ascendant the lagan or the lagna. And lagna means that which ties the soul down. And insofar as lagan means that which ties the soul down, we're thinking about the story of Prometheus when Prometheus got chained to the stone. So the Promethean inclination within all of us is our spirit, our soul, our psyche, our self. And the stone that we get chained down to is this physical body. And so the ascendant, as the lagan or this nail that ties our soul down, represents that mortal coil that causes our soul to be completely trapped in the shape of materiality. So the ascendant is important for all of those reasons, because the ascendant is what is it that locks me onto this material plane, essentially. And a big part of what locks me onto this material plane is this mask that I wear as I move throughout the world. This mask, this shell, this husk, which is the body, that husk moves forward before me, and then the me that is within that husk is introduced, you see? But it is this soul that is it is this body that is this vehicle essentially for that soul that the ascendant represents, which is why we can get so much bang for our buck by virtue of analyzing and understanding what's going on with the ascendant from the perspective of understanding the psyche, the soul, and the psyche of a person. Traditionally speaking, traditional astrologers didn't differentiate between soul and psyche because the term psyche didn't exist yet. So when we say soul and psyche, it should really be soul/psyche, because for the medieval astrologer, the psyche was the soul, or rather the soul was the psyche. What is the non-tangible part of me that makes me who I am? You see? And so that is what the ascendant is. The ascendant has within itself the body, your health, your well-being, the morality, the soul, the self, the psyche, the intellection, all of the non-tangible software that makes a person who they are is held within the ascendant. Planets in the ascendant, planets aspecting the ascendant, planets ruling the ascendant, planets having declination relationship to the ascendant, all of those things are caught up within that ascendant, which is a lot, actually, which is why it took us essentially an hour to just talk about the ascendant. Zoltan Mason, who was a teacher of the work of Moran, Jean-Baptiste Morin, who is the astrologer whose work I teach from, Zoltan Mason, he was asked in class once, Zoltan, if you have 60 minutes to read a chart, how long do you take in reading the ascendant? And Zoltan said 60 minutes. And the reason for that is because you always have to know who you're responding to. Who are you speaking to? Who is the person who is receiving this message? Who has this chart? Because a Capricorn rising person ruled by Saturn will respond to a Uranus square far differently than a Sagittarius rising person ruled by Jupiter, who will revel and who will relish in that Uranus square, versus an Aries rising person ruled by Mars, who will take the Uranus square by the horns, versus a Taurus rising person having the Uranus square, who will hate the Uranus square with all their hearts. You see? So we have to know who is the person who we're speaking to. And from a traditional astrology perspective, we find that person in the ascendant.
Thank you. That's just wonderful.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I'll take a final question if there is a final question to be asked. Hey, Lindsay.
There are some questions in the comments.
Okay. What are the questions?
Ruth was asking, just wondering if you would always bring the sun and moon in when they don't directly relate to the ascendant, and then
No.
also the D3 and the D12.
No, I wouldn't always bring the sun and the moon in when they don't directly relate to the ascendant, because I want to see what's going. If they are directly tied in with the ascendant, yes. There is another version of tradition of doing the same thing that I did tonight, which is completely done through the moon and Mercury, and that also is very valid. And we can do that at some point in time during our 12 weeks together, assuming that you don't get tired of me. I can show you how this is done through the moon and Mercury and why the moon and Mercury are used for that purpose. But no, I wouldn't bring the moon in just because unless the moon is tied in with the ascendant. Yes, next question, Lindsay, if there's a next question.
Yeah, the next question was to how do we use the D3 and the D12?
The D3 and the D12 just give us a little bit more information. It's a coloring. It's like a food coloring for who the person is. So if we come back over here, what did I say the D3 was? The D3 was Pisces. The Pisces thing only further opens up the permeability of the person and some of the humanitarian things and all of the wonderful things we can say about Pisces. It's an overlay on top of this. But then we have to ask ourselves, is that wonderful for a person who's already permeable? Is a question. And that question we should think about at some later point in time. And then the D12 of the Taurus tells us that the Taurus house within this chart is going to be very important for this person. And the Taurus house within this chart is the 7th house. So relationships are going to be very important to this person, but also other Taurian things that we might say about Taurus, the stability and the lack of change and having a sense of constancy and all the other things. So they just give us further descriptors in terms of the native. If you're really, really being super traditional, you can take a look at the term of the ascendant. So this 15 degrees Scorpio corresponds with the 15 degrees of Scorpio corresponds with Mars is the first 6 degrees. Jupiter is up until 14 degrees. It corresponds with Venus. And so that says that this person has an artistic overlay on top of them. And the person probably loves music and art and dance and poetry and writing poetry because these are Venusian things in life. Does any of that make sense to you? Kathy is saying yes, which, good. Okay, Kathy said yes. So that is another thing. But look, it's only your first night. So everything will be revealed in due course. Make sure you come back to class because this is a really nice way to spend the Sunday evening for myself and hopefully for you as well. Next question, Lindsay, as we wrap up.
I think that was the last question, but I can scroll back up and see if there's anything.
Okay, well, probably it was the last question. Anyway, my darling hearts, this was wonderful beyond measure. Nice way to start the week. Nice way to start this astrology new year. I'm very happy that all of you are here. Please go and tell your astrology friends. Please go and tell all of the people who you please go and tell all of the people who you astrologize with that these things are happening, because the world most assuredly needs better astrologers and people who have better chart reading skills. So, yes, calling all astrologians. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Be well in the world. Thank you for coming. Bye. You're so very welcome. Bye, everyone.